Kim will join us in a second as she comes on. And excited to talk to everyone and happy to chat. So, just so everyone has an idea of what we're doing, wanted to start doing webinars for Payload. I think as we expand beyond the newsletter, we had a lot of people who were talking about expanding thought leadership, figuring out ways to promote different things. And this is, we thought a good opportunity to do that. In terms of what Payload is, for those who aren't familiar with it, Payload is a new media company covering the business and policy of space. So we have a newsletter that we send out daily, but we're expanding. We're going to events, webinars, and then we're launching a podcast next week, which I actually we'll talk about a bit here, which I think we just announced today officially, though I'm sure many of you will know about it. But today's webinar is going to be on just intro to space marketing. So I speak to a lot of folks and they're always like, oh, we're so focused on building product. Like, why do we need to have a good marketing strategy? Like, our product's amazing. Everyone's going to buy it. Everyone's going to use it. And that has been something that I'm trying to debunk in the industry. So here I am talking about the importance of marketing and branding for everyone. So I'm going to start introducing our panelists. The first panelist is Patrick. So I'll turn it over to Patrick and let him introduce himself.
Awesome. Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for having me here. My name is Patrick O'Neill. I am the Public Affairs and Outreach Lead for the International Space Station National Laboratory. I have been privileged to be in this position for just about a decade. So I've been involved with almost every single payload that has been associated with the National Lab as far as sponsorship is concerned. So first and foremost, what is the ISS National Lab? So 2005, Congress in their infinite wisdom, they were looking at a lot of the great science that was happening on the space station. And they said, you know what, it'd be really cool if we expanded the capabilities of the space station that went beyond just NASA's purposes. So think of NASA as doing R&D on the space station to better understand living and working in space, developing technologies so that we can eventually go beyond low Earth orbit, whether that be to the moon or Mars or beyond. But what if, again, we opened up this unique, one-of-a-kind learning platform for R&D that could bring value to either life back here on Earth or to further business models in low Earth orbit? And so that's what ended up happening. So they turned the space station into a national laboratory. My organization, the Center for the Advancement of Science in Space, has been tasked with managing that national laboratory since 2011. And so my job is to work alongside all of the various research partners that are leveraging the ISS National Laboratory and to try to develop compelling narratives about what they're doing on the space station, why they're doing it in space, the value that brings, again, to their products or their R&D, and how that separates them from the competition. And, since we are talking about marketing, a lot of that does kind of dovetail, especially when we're talking about private sector companies, of being able to blend a unique story of innovation, but also a story, again, about what sets them apart from what it is that other people within their realm are doing. And so it's really exciting. We've had the chance to work with very recognizable Fortune 500 companies, the types of brands that you're familiar with in every single day, types of products that you play with every single day in your household, to sporting goods, to apparel, to companies that are very much so within the general media environment. So I would say that this has been a very privileged opportunity for me to be here with the ISS National Laboratory. I'm equally excited to go and talk about some of those collaborations that we have had over the last few years, and what's next for the ISS National Lab, and also what is next for branding and how it is that you can use station to your benefit.
Ian, on to you.
Cool. Thanks, Patrick. I should have had you write my intro for me. That was an excellent job. So I feel like I know more about what you do now than I could have ever learned looking it up. So thanks. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be on here as well. My name is Ian Goodrich. I'm Senior Director of Marketing for Spire Global. We are a publicly traded new space company founded around 2010. I joined in end of 2017. And I like to consider myself the first marketer that Spire hired. I think there's probably a few people that worked there at the time who would say, well, hold on there. That's not true. But I came in to run the go-to-market for the maritime product, which is Spire's first kind of dedicated business unit coming off the data collected from our constellation. We have 120 plus of these guys right here. This is how big they actually are. I can bring it over in a second. That's a CubeSat model, about 90 centimeters tall. And actually, we just had another launch yesterday where we had 5 satellites go up with SpaceX, and some of those actually were 6Us as well. So they're growing in size. Marketing's always been kind of a broad area for me. I consider myself a T-shaped marketer. For those of you who've used that term before, where I consider I can do a lot of things kind of average and then go deep on a few things. And that, for me, that deep part is product marketing, which is part of researching your message and your target buyers and things like that. And that's been a very interesting journey at Spire, especially as we've added multiple business units since the original maritime one. We are now obviously an aviation tracking company. We're obviously now a weather forecasting company, and we're also a space as a service company as well, which 3 of the satellites that launched yesterday were our space as a service customers. So it's great to be here, and I will put my email in the chat here as well. Happy to reach out. Happy to talk to anybody on the call that wants to chat to me about anything random to do with Spire or anything else. So thanks.
And our last guest is Kim Jennett from Firefly, who will be joining. We figured out the technical issues, so she should be joining in the next couple of minutes. And I'll let her give a quick background when she joins. But at a high level, she is head of communications at Firefly, which is a long. Oh, is that Kim? It might be. Oh, it's Jess. It is Jess who works with us. But Kim is head of communications at Firefly. They're a launch company. They just recently raised a $75 million Series A round, and she will be happy to add on some of the communication stuff. As you can see, everyone, this is our first webinar, so some technical difficulties. The smart thing would have been to have practice beforehand, but we decided to just go and do it. So it's kind of the fun you get with Payload of we say, okay, let's just do it, see what happens. So but someone asked how many people are here, so we have actually 55 people who have showed up. So I appreciate all of you for showing up and hearing us talk marketing. So in order to kick off the conversation, I wanted to start talking about just the importance of marketing and how it has helped companies. I think I speak to a lot of companies who they're thinking, oh, we just raised some money. Instead of spending that towards marketing a brand, we should hire another engineer or hire what other position, and they're not thinking about necessarily hiring a marketing or communications person. So I'd love to just hear from the panelists. Can they talk about how, as you come onto the company, how you think your role has made a direct impact on the organization, the brand, and maybe talk about some specific, KPIs you can talk about that, you've seen notable differences in now that you're investing in marketing and brand.
Yeah, great question. Patrick, okay, I'll go first. So I'm just going to tell a little story about that. And I don't think anybody from Spire is on the call, but if I'm wrong, they can probably slack me and tell me to shut up. But when Spire was kind of hiring for these early stage marketing roles, I remember, being lucky enough to get invited to come out and meet with the founders and a few other significant people in the office in San Francisco. And we kind of went through a whole day process. And at the end, I had to give a presentation on, what would the first 90 days look like and things like that. So I remember standing up and actually saying, you know what, you're hiring the wrong role. The role you're hiring right now for marketing is not what you need at this stage. And then quickly I said, oh, but I can do those roles for you. So, we should definitely still work together. But I think one of the interesting things about the impact that marketing has that I think maybe a lot of people might not think about immediately is that a lot of what we end up doing is sharing kind of inward. And I think, people think about marketing, they think about, okay, I own the messaging for going out, I own PR, I own comms, brand, digital, everything like that, content creation, and that's all true. But a lot of what you end up kind of sharing is back into the company to say, hey, look how amazing this case study is that we're doing. Look at these amazing things with this business we just won. And for us early on, we were trumpeting every customer we had. You had a mandate. If you signed on with us, you had to write a case study. You had to give us a quote from your CEO or CTO on why you picked Spire. You had to do this, and we were sharing all that inside, and that actually kind of helped kind of snowball, more outside, reach out as well, because your team then becomes part of that initial marketing outreach. They're sharing the stories on their LinkedIn and their social circles, and they're talking about their colleagues with it. And that's a very nice way of kind of that early impact that I think marketing did, which is, okay, I'm here to do a whole bunch of things. I've got, a 6-month plan on what we're going to have to do to tackle. But guess what? I want to talk to a lot of people inside and get everybody really motivated and focused, on execution. And I'll stop there, Patrick, if you want, maybe jump on.
Yeah, I would say, we're a little bit different too, because in theory, we are a nonprofit that manages a national laboratory in space. And we were the first entity to manage this national laboratory. So a lot of the things that we did early on as an organization was truly not only trying to stand up us as an organization, but also try to stand up the notion that you or other researchers could take advantage of this space station. So we were trying to tangentially put together kind of a process. And, there was certainly some give and take along the way. One of the things that I remember very early on about us as an organization was the question, how do we brand ourselves? Do we brand ourselves as the ISS National Laboratory, or do we brand ourselves as CASIS, the Center for the Advancement of Science in Space? And early on, there was a leaning towards positioning CASIS as the brand. But after time, we realized no one knows who CASIS is, or CASIS or CASIS. But the ISS, the space station, and the national lab, there's brand cachet around that. So, I think that when you look at trial and error, that's one of those early scenarios where, we definitely recognized that there was a lot more brand potential in positioning the ISS National Lab than there ever would have been the organization that was managing that national laboratory. Also on top of that too, I think that what was a little bit different about us, given the fact that we were a small nonprofit startup, is the notion, and I'm sure everyone hears it all the time, everyone is marketing, everyone is business development. We all kind of ran into that world because we're all trying to push as much information out as possible collectively to let people know what's happening on station, the opportunities that are available. So, I think that what happened early on for us as an organization was definitely a lot of almost throwing money up in the air and trying to see what stuck. And after a while, we were able to find a couple of areas that definitely had significant impact and value around that. And so since that time frame, we have definitely much more so focused in on those target areas of opportunity. But again, I think that sometimes as a new organization, you have to do some of that trial and error to figure out what ultimately is going to resonate with your audience base.
So a lot of points there. I want to start with Ian first. You talked about case studies and stuff. I know, you all are, you have tons of revenue, which, for most space companies, they can't say that. And you have an actual product, and that's not to, give any, what's the word I'm looking for? But
any stock tips? Yeah, no, is that what you're
saying? No. But give anyone flack. There you go. Give anyone flack to any of the launch companies that are still pre-revenue and stuff. But
I see.
For some of these companies, right, they don't really have anything that they can give to the market yet, right? They're still pre-product, pre-revenue. Are there ways to get around that? Like if you're like, hey, I'm a launch company and I want to talk with maybe you have someone who's pre-partnered with you or pre-signed with you before you actually get the launch. Any suggestions for those folks that are thinking about, like, because I love case studies as well, and it's something we're working on at Payload. But how do you do that for an industry that is so pre-revenue for so many of the companies?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, we had a Q&A come in on working with partners actually. On asking them to kind of work alongside you. And that's actually, I'm glad that Q&A came in, because that gives me a reference point for those early stages as well, where, obviously you should be focused on getting any success story written up, right? And even for the launch companies that are looking to get going and they're, or maybe even new space, new satellite companies that have got an idea to launch a payload in a certain amount of years. Anything that you can turn into something customer facing that is is kind of tangible, you should go for, right? So even if you look back at it in 3 years and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we sent that out to our customer base, it doesn't matter. But don't be afraid to try it. I think our first case study, and I'll share this with a group because it's actually kind of funny, but I won't be specific, but they wrote a case study, and actually the biggest value point I got from their case study was using some data that we actually didn't even provide. So I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. So again, it's, we're going to use it, we're going to put it out there and run with it. But on the partner thing, we had a Q&A about kind of working with partners. That's actually not a horrible way to kind of improve your kind of overall, status. We early on, especially in the maritime business, hooked up with ArcGIS, with Esri, and they were very keen to showcase the data because, as a company that does a lot of GIS, they live and breathe on people consuming maps and things like that. And we were able to provide a lot of data early on that they would put into their applications. And, there's a company, obviously a $3 billion private company, but a massive marketing engine, and it comes with a lot of kind of momentum. And we hooked up with a lot of those partners early on. And that to me is like it's a slightly different case study, but it gives you the right to drop a case study with them, and then they kind of support it, and that gives you that little boost. Now, for a launch company, again, that's not going to be probably something that they can do, but I just encourage everybody to kind of work with people that can basically hold you up for a little while, and just kind of push you a little bit further forward. And then to the Q&A question directly, absolutely, yeah, we always try to share everything that we put out. We want partners to cross promote with us as well, and we make it very easy to come and take our content and reuse it however you see fit, and we do encourage that. So thank you Tom for the question.
And Patrick, yeah, I'll let you
yeah, I can kind of piggyback on that, and I was going to lean in more to, and Ian talked about case studies, and I think from our standpoint, that was something that we are very heavily invested into, trying to be able to put together various case studies so that way we can generate demand or interest from like-minded companies or industries. And early on, we would meet with companies, and first it was just the promise and opportunity of leveraging Station, but we're now starting to get to the point where a lot of these partners that were early users of Station were actually able to generate positive results from their experiences of doing R&D on the space station. And subsequently, that just really opens up the floodgates, so to speak. So now we're no longer at a point where we're trying to put together demand generation. Now we're at the juncture where we're able to really, again, focus in on target areas of R&D on the space station to bring maximum value to the American taxpayer, to society, and the world as a whole. But again, the importance of these case studies early on, especially when you didn't necessarily have a huge repository of people that were using Station for R&D. And I'll give examples. I mean, early on, Merck was one of the largest pharmaceutical companies to leverage the ISS National Lab. And we would use that kind of case study of, here they are. Why aren't you, other big pharma, doing research on the space station? They're focused on protein crystallization growth, but there's a lot of other types of things that can happen on the space station that could benefit your R&D and ultimately result in better patient care for humans here on Earth. And from that, once one of these companies recognizes that company is doing R&D on the space station, well, then GSK is going to start doing research on the space station. Lilly is going to start doing research on the space station. Sanofi, AstraZeneca. So it really did kind of create a nice windfall where you're able to put these case studies together, which are focused more on R&D, but there is a little bit of a marketing element to it of just saying, they're doing this. Why aren't you doing this as well? So, I mean, I think that really helped set the foundation for us to work with a lot of unique partners and entities to do R&D on Station through the National Lab. And that continues to be something that really drives a lot of interest when it comes to having conversations with prospective users of Station.
Yeah, and I liked your point there, Patrick. And I know you didn't use these words, but that FOMO mentality that starts to exist. It's I think that's also like a big reason of like why to do marketing, of like you can talk about these things, and it makes it so much easier to then go convince other partners who are like, oh, this company's doing it, oh, we have to do it, right? But I guess on that point, I want to, and I don't know for you all how much this affects you all specifically, but I know a lot of folks here, their customers are defense and intelligence, and they might not be able to talk about, some of the work they do. Do you guys have some of those problems where, some of it is not, you're not able to talk? Maybe we'll start with Patrick and then turn over to you, Ian.
I'll give you a perfect example of scenarios where we have sometimes had to be mindful of communicating externally about some of the research that's going up. And obviously, we know the world we live in right now. One of the reasons why we're probably having a Zoom webinar to begin with is the recent pandemic that is actually still continuing to this day. And so when that pandemic was first hitting its fever pitch, if you will, there were a lot of pharmaceutical companies, again, that I just mentioned, some of whom were actively involved in trying to develop vaccines that would counteract against the COVID-19 pandemic. And so while they're trying to develop these vaccines, they're also sending research to the space station. Some of these companies definitely preferred that we not talk about the science that they were doing on the space station, because it would take away from the narrative of the things that they were focused on externally facing. And I think that there was kind of that thought process of, so we have this pandemic that's happening right now, but yet you're still able to go out there and do research on the space station. I mean, that's, where are your priorities residing? So there was a strong interest, I think, to try to ensure that the narrative was focused on COVID-19 related practices for those respective companies. With regard to DoD companies, so we do work with DoD companies. We work with literally the DoD itself to go and sponsor some of their research. And I think that there are some instances where we just try not to really talk too much about it. So the space station itself, it's not as though that we hide anything from people. There just might be instances where we just don't overly communicate about some of the science that's flying. We need to be as transparent as possible, but we also try to be mindful of that level of transparency that we provide. We don't have to put out press releases about every bit of research that's going up. But then there are some instances where they say, hey, we are launching this investigation and we have been given a little bit more clearance to talk about this. And so our role as managers of a national lab is to talk about that science to the level that they are comfortable with us doing it. So there was one of the questions in there about marketing communications and various levels of communication departments. Within the ISS National Lab, we have science communications, we have public affairs and outreach, we have marketing. So that's where we have our science communications team work in unison with these research partners, and we put together various communications that everyone is comfortable with, and then we put them out through our various channels. And one of the things that is different about us versus if one of these companies puts something out, NASA, for instance, is not going to be able to promote the fact that a DoD company or a researcher is doing something through the national lab. However, if the national lab puts something out through our channels, we can work with NASA to promote that because we work in unison with NASA to utilize the space station to its fullest capacity. So that's one of the benefits of working alongside us, is being able to find unique avenues of amplifying your messaging so that people are aware of the science that you're performing on station.
Ian, I'll let you chime in there.
Yeah, great. I'm glad this came up. So for those of us focused on the US, I actually think working with government contracts is the opposite of kind of what your intro was. The amount of transparency on the contracts that are put in place, especially with companies like Spire, is impressive. In fact, I was multitasking when you guys were talking about that. So I'm posting a link here for everybody that if they don't want to click on it later or click on it now to check out. But that is literally every dollar that the United States government has given Spire through awards. And if you click on that link, the top three, which are the most recent, one's $8 million, $7 million, and $6 million. And that's an amazing thing to be able to have and aggregate and put out there and say, oh, the United States government has given us this much money and this is what they do with it. So they're like instant kind of awards. Now, on the PR side, we obviously, when we have a significant win with a private customer, we initially are very quick to say, hey, would you mind doing a joint press release with us? That kind of thing, because it is the story we want to share. But over the last year and a half, I would say that I've been really pleasantly surprised how flexible even the United States government, some of the biggest agencies, have been about working with us on PR. In fact, again, this is not highlighting Spire here. I'm just giving it as an example. But on Monday, this past Monday, we released an award that we had in conjunction with the DoD, and we sent that approval in. And I remember talking to the PR team, being like, "Hey, okay, that's going into the DoD Public Affairs Office. Let's schedule that for maybe Q3." And I was deadly serious, right? I'm like, that's going to be about 8 weeks for that to dribble through the process. They got back to us in 5 days, and we launched the next working day. That's incredible. So I see a real change on there, and that actually ties in quite well to how, again, staying on the U.S. government focus. There's actually a question in here about channels to focus on for early startups. And if you, again, I know, I apologize, this is all US focused because that's what I live and breathe right now. But the amount of executives and high ranking officials that are now on LinkedIn, it has really improved over the last year and 2 years. And I kept wondering why. And I'm like mentally thinking about that through. And it's all because of the how much that's now bled into the Microsoft ecosystem. If you remember, Microsoft now owns LinkedIn, right? I forget when they bought that, but that is all bled into the Office network and the connections, and all that stuff is starting to become more less obvious that it's happening. And we're seeing more and more of these executives show up, these high-ranking officials, and they're out there posting things and content, and that is a great channel to use, especially for early stage. We are heavily involved in LinkedIn, both from an obvious kind of one-way point of view where we post out and have conversations, and try and encourage conversations. We also use LinkedIn very, very heavily from a social selling point of view. So that would be a channel that I would recommend to anybody to get involved in. And don't talk to me about social selling, and I'm not going to sit here and train anybody on it, but do your own research and look into that and see if it works for you.
So
but great question.
So yeah, and I want to build on that, but before I do it, one comment I want to make. It's interesting that you talked about the government being more active. I was at Space Symposium, and the NRO had a booth, and I was just shocked that the NRO had a booth and that they were willing to talk to us. And I'm actually, for all of you, I'm trying to get the NRO to do a webinar with us. They said yes to it. They said they were actually interested in doing. Well, I shouldn't say they said yes. They said they were interested in doing it, which is in itself kind of surprising to me that they'd even be interested in it, because for them, they're really trying to change the narrative that government is cool. We're doing cool stuff, but there's also the talent component to it that I think a lot of us sometimes forget, is that the government also needs to sell the space industry. It's like, hey, we want to go work for the NRO or NASA or CIA or whoever. But to touch on the questions in the chat, and by the way, feel free to ask questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and to build on that, if you all have information, how are you thinking about what channels to put it through, and I'm trying to keep it high level because I know a lot of folks here are new to marketing. If you're announcing something, is it a press release? Are you trying to maybe place it with a media company like ourselves? Are you doing paid spend with it? Is it on social? Can you guys talk about maybe if I have X news, how you think about disseminating it across different channels so that it reaches the right stakeholders?
Yeah, great question. Patrick, do you want to go first? I'm happy to chip in.
Well, I actually, in some ways, it probably would be more helpful if you would, because unfortunately, as a national lab, we are a little bit nuanced, I guess, in a sense. So, if we are going to put out press releases, we will kind of do it the traditional route where we'll put it out through our channels. We have a pretty robust media database, but then on top of that, we will pay to play every now and then. So for particular releases, we'll use a PR newswire, for instance. We also have access to Eureka alerts so that way it's able to reach various research audiences. But we just touched a little bit, and Ian talked about LinkedIn. And I think that's a great way where we have been able to mobilize our leadership to be able to put out various things that they're putting out on their own personal pages, and we highly encourage that, so that way it gets beyond just our little scope, and we're adding additional tentacles to it. So for us, we always have to be lean and mean when it comes to trying to put out various communication pieces. Again, every now and then we do have a chance to splurge on things like a PR newswire, but again, that costs money. Otherwise, we're really trying to tap into the audiences that we have already developed through our social channels. We do have the luxury of working with NASA, where we have a unique relationship with them through a cooperative agreement. So we definitely are ensuring that they are cognizant of everything that we are putting out, and that they can help to amplify as appropriate. So that definitely helps to spread the word. But again, otherwise, it's pretty grassroots from our perspective. But equally interested to see what Ian would have to say about this.
Well, before you jump in, just one comment to everyone that I want to add is Patrick talked about PR Newswire and Incision and stuff. Sorry, he talked about, sorry, I had someone come in, man, just not doing well today. We had the technical, had an interruption. I guess this is the fun you get with Payload. You just never know what's going to happen. With PR Newswire and Cision, instead of paying money, what I'd recommend to a lot of y'all is actually just come up with a list of reporters and just send them an email BCC so you don't have to pay for it. So, if you do Payload, Space News, CNBC, Quartz, just send everyone an email and, that's it. And it's free. That's my one suggestion to everyone. You don't need to use Cision. You don't need to use Business Wire or Newswire, PR Newswire. You can just do it yourself. Sorry, I had to add that. Ian, on to you.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, that leads in well. So I'm also from the early days remembering logging into Business Wire before it changed. I mean, and actually someone slacked me and told me that Microsoft bought LinkedIn in 2016. So I was way off on my years there. But if you think about how slow Microsoft works, about 6 years for it to propagate, that sounds about right, doesn't it? So, but I remember literally logging into Business Wire and setting up a press release about a new product and seeing it calculate the cost. You put a picture in there and the cost goes up another $500. You add different audiences and it's thousands and thousands of dollars. And I remember thinking, holy smokes, like if I press this button, that's the entire marketing budget gone for the year. I mean, like we're talking early on here, right? Like dealing with that. But it's interesting when you said about sending out the email to all the reporters that you have. Obviously you got to start that list, right? Like you got to have to collect, all those reporter lists and things like that. And I think it's important for the audience not to overlook. That's a very traditional industry. I mean, obviously it's been revolutionized with online content. That's not what I'm focusing on. But those three types of press release that you can still, really there's two, right? There's the embargoed and the exclusive. Sorry, the embargoed and the exclusive. And I wouldn't forget about those two. Like if you've got a very impactful writer or an outlet, and for us that would be chasing someone in like the New York Times or in the BBC and things like that. If you offer them truly like an exclusive and and they pick you up on that, that's a great way to kind of start that relationship. And the difference between exclusive and embargo, just to help everybody level set, embargo means it can go to multiple people and everyone is agreeing to not publish it until a certain time and date. And then exclusive is you're giving it to one person so they can get everything done before you make that announcement. And it still is quite valid. Obviously now as a publicly traded company, we have a lot more investment in in that area, and we're following all the rules we have to do, about releasing things before trading and everything like that. But in those early days, it was very much zeroing in on a reporter or a writer that was writing on the story we wanted to kind of piggyback on. And that's easy when you've got kind of global data sets and things like that. But again, looking at launch, looking at, there's a few people on the list here are saying they're doing micro propulsion. There's a lot of people tracking that industry now. And worst case, get a subscription to something like Meltwater. Get in there, maybe get a demo, get a trial, get in there. A massive amount of access to reporter information in there. I actually think we had a question coming up on that as well. Oh, that's more about YouTubes and podcasts. That's a good one for you. But there is another question about scrolling back up. Real question about designers and content. And I would love to tackle that one now too, because that's actually an area that I'm really passionate about. So one of my first initial hires was a contractor, before we could hire people in, and it was content writing. And the person's actually saying, do they have space industry experience? And actually, the two best writers I've ever worked with at Spire that I still have on contract today have nothing to do with space. They're more kind of human writers, so to speak. One is very successful. The New York Times has written a lot of stories about human trafficking and things like awful events that happen around the world. And that mindset has been very very, very appropriate for when we're writing about our stuff. And I think they're asking a little bit more about design agencies as well. And we've had various agencies come in and out, but again, not a single one has had space experience to date. So it's a great question. Thanks.
And Patrick, before I let you jump in, also on our end, we're more media, but our two writers that we hired did not have space experience, and they've done a great job for us. So, I'd almost recommend not hiring people in the industry necessarily. because they might do things the way that they've always been done. And while I will say some space companies do a good job of marketing, I would say the industry is still traditionally very old school. And I think, one of the reasons we're talking about this stuff is to help the industry move into a new age. Because ultimately, the space industry is really cool and we want people to think it's really cool. We don't want it to be an industry that looks stale and dying, which it definitely is not. But Patrick, I'll let you jump in there.
I think you both hit it directly on the head. I mean, from my perspective, you want to have as many good ideas as possible. And if you're only looking at people that come from this particular industry, then you're certainly cutting yourself short. And so, a lot of the vendors that we have worked with in the past, they definitely don't specialize in space. They might be someone that has a little bit more tech experience or delves outside of just the traditional space environment. But you need, again, those types of fresh perspectives so that way it can really give you an idea about how to think differently and how to incorporate those thoughts into developing something that is cool, compelling, and gets people excited about whatever it is that you're trying to tell, whether that be a product or whether that be research. Again, fresh viewpoints, it's that I think has been something that we have always gravitated towards. Part two of the question I see there is, do we have any designers on staff? We actually don't, but I can tell you that we will be hiring designers in the not too distant future because while we do work with a lot of outside vendors right now, we are in a sense trying to consolidate some of that. So, down the road, be on the lookout for those that are interested in designing in the space realm. The ISS National Lab might be on the lookout.
Yeah, and if you email us, I'm happy to also provide folks with a list of like good agencies or good contractors that do design work. There's a few that I know offhand, both in the industry and outside the industry. But I see a lot of questions that are being asked, and actually one that I want to ask. But before I do, actually, wait, Ian, it looked like you unmuted, so I want you to get what you were going to say before I.
No, I'm good. Go ahead.
So we're talking a lot about narratives and getting our information out there. So whether it's Spire or ISS or your company, how to disseminate it. But one of the questions that I think frustrates a lot of us that was asked is, what about the narrative of the industry as a whole? Is it the responsibility of the companies to help challenge this? So I think the big narratives that we see are, space is about billionaires, or space is about or not about billionaires, but it's killing the environment, or it's bad for the environment. I think another one I've seen is like, there's only military use cases. I've seen a bunch of just narratives that are completely wrong. There was a Twitter thread that I saw just went viral about like, Elon and SpaceX, and just listing all these things about SpaceX and Starlink that were just like patently false. Do you all at the company level try to combat those narratives? Do you even think it is the responsibility of the companies, or is that more fall on like trade associations or fall on some of these bigger folks, or do we just have to ignore it and do our work? So I know it's a bit of a loaded question. Ian, I'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, again, for us, one of those subjects would be space debris, and obviously, leaving the planet and things like that. Obviously, rocket launch is the only part of the ecosystem we don't do, right? We just hand those off to others, so we get to kind of pleasantly ignore that part of it. But space debris is one that we have seen kind of coming up and down, and we have to be aware of every time. It's a value prop to say, hey, I've got 120 plus satellites, right? And everyone's like, okay, great. Well, so what happens when they they stop functioning? What et cetera, et cetera. And you can approach it from a factual point of view, like you can actually share the standards that you're willingly signing up to. There are some loose standards around deorbit of debris and things like that. And this came up recently within the last 6 months, because we actually launched a satellite for an Austrian space. I think it was maybe just Austria Space, but they launched a CubeSat that had a special type of sensor for detecting micro debris in low Earth orbit, right? So here we are putting a satellite up that's actually up there to find debris, and it's kind of like it brought that conversation to the top again. How I would approach that is we have worked with a lot of the industry associations and supported them. So we will encourage the small satellite alliances and et cetera, et cetera. Again, I can email out a list of all the kind of industry areas, and we encourage and provide a lot of data to all of them on life cycles of satellites and truly what happens when a satellite for us expires. And usually what happens to ours, just to be clear, is we're at low Earth orbit with no propulsion, right? So eventually the drag will bring the CubeSat down to a point where the gravity just takes over and it gets pulled down very quickly, and it instantly burns up and it's gone. But we explain that life cycle of all that and share a lot of the information with those industry kind of lead thought leaders, so they can approach that in a kind of a roundabout way. I've also been known to throw our founders and kind of C-suite at panels and things that have those subjects on there, because I think they give a very good explanation on that too. But yeah, great question. And I'm glad those questions are being asked though.
Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective, from an ISS National Lab standpoint, we definitely try to pick our battles as it relates to the types of I guess chatter that kind of goes out there. But one area that I think that we are quite sensitive to, and I say that sensitive because the International Space Station, in the overall scheme of things, it is the most expensive thing that humanity has ever built. We are looking at upwards of $100+ billion that has been allocated towards the development and the sustainability of the space station, and knowing that it's going to be happening through at least 2030, obviously we will continue to make that continued investment into it. One of the areas that we've been tasked with trying to do is to develop private sector interest in utilization of the space station. And so one of the things that we try to communicate to the public is that, the ride up, the ride down, the astronaut as the technician that is helping to perform these investigations, those are all things that are not passed over to the research teams. Those are things that are, that are covered, if you will, by NASA, ergo the American taxpayer. So there's a lot of questions that we sometimes get about, well, why on earth would Adidas or Nickelodeon or Hewlett Packard or Budweiser, why would we as an American taxpayer be allocating dollars to be able to allow them to do R&D on the space station? And it's a fantastic question, but sometimes it comes with it, again, with a loaded perspective where they're trying to sit there and say, shouldn't these companies be paying for it themselves? And the short answer is that's why you have a national lab. We are opening access and opportunity. And in a sense, because NASA has already purchased the ability to go out there and launch these respective vehicles to the space station, our job is to help load them up with as much compelling science as possible. So what we try to impart to members of the journalistic community, or to those that are asking questions about the types of companies that are doing R&D on station, is everything that goes to the space station. It's not a gimmick. It has to be verifiable science. It's got to be operationally feasible. There has to be scientific merit behind it. There has to be some sort of an ROI that could be tangible benefit for the American taxpayer. And that sometimes means that, you're going to be working with large companies, but that also means you're going to be working with innovative startups or other government organizations. It really takes all of us being able to do R&D on the space station. But sometimes, again, those recognizable brands, those recognizable companies, they're the ones that oftentimes kind of get that immediate notice from media and some of the scrutiny that coincides with that. And it's our job to be able to take a step back and say, hey, they're doing real R&D on the space station, and ultimately it could bring a lot of value back to us as humanity, and it doesn't just go back into the pockets of these respective companies.
On mute. So a lot of good points there. I want to, though, make sure that we get to all the questions being asked in the chat. So I'm going to combine a few that were asked. But, we're talking about narratives, and we talked a bit about like doing press or social, but someone talked about podcasts and like influencers and stuff. So I would love to just talk. I mean, is that stuff you all think about? I know, to be honest, one of the reasons that Payload is launching a podcast, and when we started, we tried to find this. It's actually, there are very few space podcasts that exist. There's a few good ones I recommend if anyone's a big podcast. Arvin has a good one, and Raphael Rodkin. just to name a few, Space in 60. So there's a couple, but they have very small, viewerships compared to like if you go into crypto, where there's like 10 or 20 podcasts that all have 100,000, listeners per episode. So, Patrick, Ian, how do you guys think about like those influencers? And maybe it's not your traditional influencer. Maybe it's like, maybe it's a politician who like you're trying to get to promote. Like, how do you think about like those leverage points of individuals or brands that you want to be aligned with?
So I can speak to that real quick. And I think podcasts are definitely, hot right now. I know that NASA for the longest time, there's a couple of podcasts that they have. One of them that is focused specifically towards the ISS is Houston, We Have a Podcast. And that's one that's been pretty successful for them. We're looking into what a podcast for an ISS National Lab might be as well. One thing that I would throw out too, that I think that NASA has done a fantastic job with over the last 5 to 7 years is the advent of the NASA Social Program, wherein they basically invite influencers to come out to respective launches, whether that be a commercial resupply services mission, hopefully crew missions in the future as we start to move away from the COVID-19 pandemic. But again, it's the notion of trying to bring these people that again have large audiences and kind of open up the doors and then let them know what's kind of happening behind the scenes at a rocket launch and why we're having these rocket launches. So I think that for the right influencers, it makes a heck of a lot of sense to try to bring them in and get them excited about the types of things that are happening in the space world right now. So I think that from a national lab perspective, that's something that we're very keen to. We're definitely open to trying to think of new ways to try to tap into audiences and really get people, again, galvanized about what's happening on the space station, because, again, there has been such a tremendous investment into the viability of this platform.
Yeah, great. I think on the podcast, on the new the alternative channels, the podcast, that kind of average. I think I'm not going to say I personally was late to kind of get started with that, but two interesting points on that. I think since going public, we've actually really accelerated that focus. We're doing a lot more kind of founder podcasts and things like that. That may have been a little bit late to start that activity. I think we should have done more on that. But one interesting note on the podcast is we actually use those as onboarding tools. When staff come on, there's a lot to onboard at any company, right? It doesn't matter how big you are, you want to kind of share your vision and everything like that. And we actually have a set of those that we will share with new hires. And that's been hugely successful. So I guess I haven't learned from that to go out to the market a little bit more, but I agree. It's, and then influencers, I think in the space industry, you see a fair amount of companies like Spire who will have a pretty hefty strategic board or a group of people that have got a lot of experience in the market, and they will be spokespeople at events and panels and things like that. And it absolutely is a way to go forward. To have that kind of experience covering what you're trying to do and what message you're trying to have. Obviously, it's not going to be inexpensive, to build out that whole kind of group. But I think early on, you can likely latch on to some NGOs and some nonprofits that will be very influential on that. I like to think of, for us, it was the Global Fishing Watch, which is a very well-respected, nonprofit tracking illegal and unregulated fishing around the world. And obviously, they're a customer of the data. Naturally, the ship tracking data is crucial for them. But they have very influential people on the team that are happy to come and kind of share the message and share what you're trying to do along those lines. I'm thinking about that new company that has Steve Wozniak on it, right? So none of us can beat that guy, right? So it's kind of good. But.
Yeah, I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on the name, but they also announced I think a partnership with Rolex for watches. But on that note, Ian, and to talk about it's a debris company. Wait, what's the name of it? Why am I drawing a blank? It's do you guys know the name of it? Drawing a blank, doesn't matter. But anyhow, but I want to use them.
They're going to be really upset with you.
No, Privateer. I remembered it.
Privateer, yeah.
Apologies, Privateer. But actually, we'll say Privateer is a great example of a brand that I think does really good marketing and branding work. So you guys should all check them out. They announced a partnership with Rolex, and they're a special case in that they're able to do things that I think most folks can't because they have Wozniak. But it is something for all of you to consider. It doesn't have to be a space channel you have to go down. You can go down other channels, and especially for a lot of companies that they they are space companies that target non-space verticals. I think a lot of people forget that there's a lot of companies like that, especially in EO. So it's something to consider for all of you. I want to get to one last question before we wrap up. Maybe we'll have time for another if this question goes quick. I'm not sure if I'm understand the question, so I'll ask it, and Ian and Patrick maybe understand it a bit better. But how has marketing become more important as your company has grown and gone public? I think that's for Ian. Maybe like quantify budget spend and how marketing has become, more of a priority compared with just tech R&D. So Ian, I'll let you take it to,
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one interesting thing to think about when you go public, your marketing gets bigger, right? So all of a sudden you've gone from really just trying, in my particular case, really just trying to find people to buy our solutions and offerings, right? Like that was the original goal. And I think early on, Ari actually talked about, KPIs, and early on, we attach marketing to revenue and close won revenue. And I get a lot of flack from that, from other kind of marketers that I work with who like to show lots of charts showing impressions, visits, clicks, MQLs, SALs, SQLs, pick your acronym, right? Pick your understanding. And I'm always like, yeah, great. They're great charts up and to the right. Perfect. Guess what? We got more visits because we spent more money, of course. But I like to really always attach to pipeline and marketing influence pipeline and marketing influence close won. It's going to be hard to do, especially as you get bigger and your volume goes up when you have 600 plus customers. That's you need to rely more and more on automation. But I'm going to guess that a lot of early stage companies probably acted a lot like I did when we got two MQLs a week, right? So of course I'm going to jump in on those guys and I'm going to understand every part of how that person got to find out about us, and why did they click there, and why did they do that, and what intrigued them, and how do they find out about us. And you can do that at that level, and just don't forget that, and then kind of build that out. But to answer the question a little bit more focused there, when you go public, your marketing audience just gets bigger because all of a sudden you've now got an investor community, and now we even have a retail investor community, right? Which is it's always been around, but now there's a lot more interest in that, and we have to reach out to those channels. So you've got a lot more people to talk to. Investor relations is very, very similar to me on the inside, like a product marketing kind of group. You're very horizontal. You're responsible for a lot of messaging and value props. You're just taking that out and taking it to the investor community. Budget-wise, I have a fantastic story about joining Spire in the early days and asking for how much money they spent on marketing last year, and being told an amount of money, and actually knowing that I just came from a company where I spent more on the dinner than they spent on marketing the year before. So it's definitely a case of again, I'm not saying these in cliche terms. It is being scrappy. It is begging and pleading for people to do stuff for free. It is giving away what you've got that you can monetize, right? I know it sounds a bit scary to say it like that, but if you have a nonprofit that really, really wants every single fishing boat that went through the Gulf of Mexico for the last 4 years, and you can get that data to them, and they're going to do something for you on that, maybe even a webinar, do it, zero cost. I know you're giving up your IP and you're giving up your data, but just go for it and be really excited about that. But honestly, as you grow, when you fit into the public model and you line up for the Wall Street expectation of what you spend on R&D and marketing, naturally all those areas are going to increase. So hopefully that answered that person's question, but feel free, I'm not sure who asked that, but feel free to ping me directly and we can chat a bit more detail on that.
Well, I guess I get to tackle it from a completely different perspective because obviously I work at the behest of the American taxpayer. And so everything that we do is with a level of stewardship. But Ian, anytime you want to go out there and take me to one of those very expensive dinners, let me know. I'm happy to go out there and participate on your conference. So.
Just for the record, that was before Spire, just for the record, in case anyone's listening.
All right. Well, actually, I think unfortunately I wouldn't be able to join them now anyway, but immaterial. So, again, I mentioned that, again, we are funded by the taxpayers of the United States of America through NASA. And so for us, marketing is, and we are responsible for selecting the vast majority of the investigations that go to the space station. So there is an inherent level of stewardship that coincides with that. And part of that means being able to communicate about the science that is going to the space station. So a lot of people are kind of surprised when they find out that I believe the largest department that we have within our organization is actually our marketing department. And the reason for that is because we need to be able to tell as many stories about what's being selected, why it's being selected, why it's going to station, the impacts it could have towards humanity, et cetera, is possible. We need to be able to demonstrate value for why it is that we have made this investment into the space station and how the investment that we have made thus far will contribute to future commercial LEO destinations and other business models in space. So that's why, I would look at it. Obviously, we're all biased. Marketing is critically important to all of that. From an actual budget perspective, our budget actually really continues to be pretty much the same, but we are empowered to think out of the box again in a grassroots perspective. The questions of influencers or podcasts or are the relationships that we can forge with members of the media, whether it's through exclusive opportunities or embargoed opportunities, trying to think about new ways of really positioning our science. So I think that given the limitations we have from a budget perspective that maybe private companies like Aspire might have a little bit more, luxury with. Again, I think in some ways that's what makes it a little bit fun, is to think differently and try to find ways of being able to tout the things that your organization is good at to either the general public or to target audiences that can help drive your mission further.
So I know it's 12 o'clock. Don't want to hold anyone over. I think we could talk for a lot more. Just to wrap things up, I'm going to send everyone an email with contact information for Ian and Patrick, so that if you all want to talk to them or something they said that was just, so inspiring, you want to hear more or get feedback or whatever it is, I'll provide it. I'm also, and there was a lot of questions asked. Maybe I'll put together like some type of document or just a list of like, resources I recommend for marketing. As many of you know, I started a marketing newsletter for the space industry so that, to sort of help with these topics. And then my last point is I put my contact information in the chat, but it's ari@payloadspace.com. If you want to chat marketing, if you're looking to announce some news, or if you're thinking about advertising, would love to hear from you and talk. And I plan to do more of these. So hopefully it was helpful. Please let me know if it was, because that'll encourage me to do more of them. If I don't hear from anyone, I won't, because it sounds like, no one found this valuable. So, and we promise that they will be a bit more organized next time. Kim apologized. So I plan to do another one with her in it so that we can have her talk about Firefly and the work they're doing there, which is, I think, very important for launch. So thanks again, everyone, and speak to you all soon.